Hi, welcome back to Books on the Go. I'm Anna and I'm doing my women's long list predictions today. I've been inspired by Eric Carl Anderson at The Lonesome Reader, who did his with Anna, and Simon Savage on Savage Reads. And I can't believe it's that time of year again. It feels like not that long ago I guess it wasn't that long ago that the Women's Prize was last announced, but the long list has come around again. So I have got, in no particular order, I've made a list of 20 books that I think will be on the long list, and it's partly a wish list and partly there are a couple that I think will be on it even though I didn't love them, and also there are a couple that I haven't read at all but I'm hoping they'll be on it because that will prompt me to pick them up and read them sooner rather than later. So I've got everything today. So in no particular order, I have got Everything Under by Daisy Johnson. And I love the fact that this is on the list, if for no other reason than to look at this beautiful cover again. This is the story of Gretel and her mother. So I think she's trying to find her mother, and they had become estranged, but then they form an uneasy relationship again. And she also has flashbacks to her time on the river because they lived on the river for a while when she was growing up. And it really develops. It's a very quirky story, and I love that about Daisy Johnson's writing. I find her writing she firmly puts the characters and the setting on the page, and you can taste and smell the environment that they're in. And I found it really original and compelling, and it is also cleverly weaves in a Greek myth, which I won't give away, but I really enjoyed it. I think that she's a real writer to watch, indeed already doing really well, but that one I very much hope will be on the long list. That's Everything Under. And some of these are overlapping with the Man Booker shortlist, I think, and this one certainly is. This is Milkman by Anna Burns, which won the Booker last year, 2018. I loved this, and I didn't love it to begin with, so it's very unusual for me. I don't normally persevere with books if I'm finding them hard to get into, but I'm so glad that I did. It's a story set in Belfast in Northern Ireland, although that city is not named, but it reflects Belfast in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. But it's the story of a girl, a young woman who is unnamed. I just went to look for her name and I'd forgotten, of course, she's not named, but she's middle sister in a family of at least 5 children. She has 3 wee sisters who are the younger ones and some older sisters. So I struggled at first with the fact these people and places aren't named, and with the writing style, which is really long sentences and long paragraphs, so that sometimes, even though I loved the writing, I sometimes found I was sort of sinking in the page because there was no break. But I'm so glad that I kept going, and I kept going because I found the protagonist really compelling, and I actually loved her sense of humour. And so I did keep going, and it became just more and more compelling, and by the end of it I was completely won over, and it was one of those books that I couldn't stop thinking about. And I've heard an interview with her where she said, of course, she tried doing it with naming the places and the people, and it just didn't seem right. And I totally get that now. When you look back on it, if they were all named, it would be very ordinary, and as it was, it just took it to a different level and made it in some ways more sinister, and it just makes you think about so many things. I could do really a whole video on this book, but I thought it was such a worthy winner of the Booker Prize, and I certainly expect it to be on the long list, if not the short list, for the Women's Prize. So that's Milkman. And then we have, this is one that Simon Savage had on his list, and that inspired me to put it on because I loved this as well. My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite, which I absolutely loved. It's hard to compare because I've been talking about Milkman, which I think is a more of a heavyweight book, but this does a lot of things in a short book and in a story that seems in a way deceptively simple, because it's the story of Halliday, who gets a phone call from her sister Ayula, who says, I've murdered another boyfriend, and it turns out Ayula has done this before. And so there's a comical or crime premise to it, which you might think it's a bit of a lighter read. Well, it is a lighter read, but it's still doing a lot because you're exploring the relationship between the sisters. You're looking at Lagos as a city and as a place to live and how that works. And there are a lot of dynamics, and there's a dark secret which underlies the family setup. So it's actually very interesting and very well written, really engaging. So I'd like to see that on the long list. I don't know if it's as obvious a choice, but really, really loved that. That's My Sister the Serial Killer. And I think another one that will definitely be on the long list is Normal People by Sally Rooney, which we read and did for the podcast and loved. Again, it's deceptively light or deceptively simple in that it's very easy to read, it's accessible, it's one of those books you could recommend to anyone, and it's exploring the relationship between Connell and Marianne, I think it is, and it goes from about 2011 to 2015. It's easy to read, but there's a lot going on. But the thing that I loved about this was the freshness of it and the honesty of the language and the fact that she's not trying to overwrite it. It's very simple, but just the feel of these characters, they feel very true to life, and that's a great achievement, I think. So interesting to see how this will go. That's Normal People. And then another one that I think is likely, Circe by Madeline Miller. So this is taking the goddess, I don't know if she's completely a goddess, I should know because I have read the book, but taking Circe, the character, and really telling her story, which is partly invented, but drawing on all of the myths that relate to her. And Madeline Miller, I think, is quite a scholar and has or certainly has researched it a lot, and she wrote Song of Achilles, which I think is a previous winner of the Women's Prize, and that was also inspired by Greek mythology. So this is certainly a subject area that she comes to it with a great passion and knowledge, and the book is beautifully written. It's really generous, it's really lyrical. I think I gave it 5 stars. I didn't feel a sense of dramatic tension because it's more a case of telling her life story, or imagining her life story. And so from the time that she's living with her father, who I think was Helios, to the time that she gets banished to the island, so she's living on her own and has to be resourceful. Odysseus comes to visit, or not visit, but they land on the island, and so you have that interlude and so on. And so there's not that sense of story in the sense that you're anxious about what will happen next. Beautifully written, I think a great accomplishment, and I do expect to see it on the long list. That's Circe. And then I have some that I don't have with me. One is along similar lines, The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, which I should have. I thought I did have it somewhere. It's one that we read and did on the podcast. And that was an interesting one for me. I loved the writing. I think Pat Barker's extraordinary, and I actually loved reading it. I got really into it. It's the retelling of the Iliad from Briseis's point of view, who was taken as a slave for Achilles. Oh my gosh, I hope I have that right. and then given to Agamemnon because there was a power struggle, and then I think given back to Achilles. Anyway, it's drawn from those events in the epic poem, but the only caveat that I have is that it read beautifully, and her humour, her directness, but the only thing I found was that it is telling a Greek myth, but her sensibility is very English. So there was a scene where Achilles is choosing his slave, and it was something like, they present these women to him, and he said something like, "She'll do, cheers lads," or something like that. And it's meant to be a really hard-hitting scene in that he's so casual about it, and yet this is doing so much harm to her. But I just found it very English, and I felt like that should be in England, and it didn't feel Greek to me, whereas they're in Greece or what is now Turkey. So I felt like it didn't feel authentic, and I don't know if that's nitpicking. It might just be where my taste is now. I'm kind of looking for more local authors from those countries. But anyway, that's, I think, just an idiosyncratic issue that I had. And the only other thing I found was that, to me, I thought that I'd feel much, much more upset and moved by her plight, and somehow I didn't. Achilles still, to me, was the hero character with all the action and all the drama, and the one that you're interested in. And that's such an interesting thing in itself, because that's really almost the point that Pat Barker is making, that he's the one who has had all the stories told about him. And that's why she wanted to focus on Briseis, but I didn't find her story as dramatic as I thought I would. And I suppose I then had the contrast, because we then read The Last Girl by Nadia Murad, who was taken as a sex slave by ISIS in recent times in a not dissimilar way. Her family also was killed, or many of them, and it was very real and very unflinching and incredibly moving. So I sort of felt like that I didn't get that from the Pat Barker book, but I think it's also very, very well done. So I'd certainly think it should be longlisted, and I think it will be. But anyway, that was a bit off on a tangent. So that's The Silence of the Girls. And then I had one that I haven't seen on others' predictions, and I don't know why that is, but Asymmetry by Lisa Halliday. I absolutely loved that. I read it in January, and I thought it was perfect, just a perfect novel, a really interesting novel. And you could say that it's almost two short stories with a third section at the end, but for various reasons I found them very coherent, and I think it does actually work as a novel. So I don't know if that's an issue, whether it's not being judged as such, but I thought it was. And if you read it closely, there are all sorts of links and connections, which is just another fascinating and fun layer of the reading experience. But I really, really loved it. The first part is a young woman who has an affair with a very much older famous writer, and it's loosely based on Lisa Halliday's relationship with Philip Roth. And the second section is, I've forgotten his name, but he is an Iraqi American economist, and he's on the way back to Iraq. He's held up at Heathrow, and he's just in a waiting room, and he's sort of telling his story, and that's really engaging as well. And the last bit is the famous author Ezra Blazer on Desert Island Discs, and it's that interview, and I thought that was just perfectly executed, very funny, but also uncomfortable. And there's so much in the book it's a really good one to discuss, and I would definitely expect to see it longlisted if it's eligible, and I hope it will be. Now, another one that I haven't seen is The Lost Man by Jane Harper, and perhaps because it's a crime novel, and I don't think they would typically be on the long list, but we had Snap by Belinda Bauer on the Booker Longlist, so I thought I would include a crime. And I've been thinking about it this week because Jane Harper's coming to Adelaide Writers' Week next week, and we're actually going to be interviewing her for the podcast, which is very exciting. And so I've been thinking today about The Lost Man, and I think it stands up as a work of literary merit in terms of being character driven. It covers some issues which I won't spoil, but including just what it's like living in outback Australia and how hard that is and how people manage in that environment. But it's really interesting on lots of levels, but is also, and this is the bonus, I think, just works as a very well plotted crime suspense thriller, which the tension just builds and builds and builds and builds. So it's the three brothers, and one of them is found dead at the start of the novel. I think Cameron is found dead, and Nathan, his brother, is trying to find out what happened. It looked like he just got stranded in the desert, really. It's so remote where they are. It starts slowly, and then the tension just cranks up. So that one I'd love to see on the long list. I think it possibly would be a surprise, but I would like to see that recognised. Another one that I have read that I again haven't seen on others' predictions, but if it's eligible, I think it's a possibility, is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. And it's one we've just done on the podcast, and Amanda and I had mixed feelings. We thought it was very beautiful, but we both also didn't love it completely in the way that lots of readers have. So it's interesting. It's about Kaya, and she grows up in the swamp in North Carolina, so very remote. She has to fend for herself, and she meets two young men, and one of them, Chase, is found dead in 1969. So we go from that scene back to the 1950s, and really it's a coming of age of Kaya as she grows up, and we get closer and closer to 1969, but it's also solving the mystery of the death of Chase. And for us, the mystery wasn't suspenseful enough to be driving the book forward, but also the coming of age is a bit slow because a lot of the time she's on her own. So it kind of livens up a bit when you have other characters coming into it, and towards the end when the timelines merge and they have courtroom scenes, there's that, to me, that had a lot more life in it. But the beauty of the earlier sections and her time in the swamp is the nature writing, and Delia Owens is a very renowned and accomplished nature writer. So those sections really are beautiful, and I think they elevate it above the usual novel. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was longlisted. That's what did I say that was called? That's Where the Crawdads Sing. And what else did I have? Washington Black by Edugyan. So this is another one that I have read. We did it on the podcast. Annie and I didn't love it. And again, I think the writing is really strong, but for us, it was too far-fetched. And so we didn't believe in it. And so that took away from the dramatic tension, which is what keeps you turning the page and engaged in the story. And there were just too many coincidences and sort of fanciful things happening. So I think I'm definitely in the minority. I know that. So I have no doubt it will be longlisted, but it just, didn't work for me. And then some that I hope will be on the long list so that I can read them. One is The Water Cure, which is, I think, like a feminist dystopian fantasy. And dystopian and fantasy is usually not my thing, but I've heard good things about this one, so I'm keen to pick it up. And it was on my radar last year, and I never got to it, so I'm ready. I'm ready for The Water Cure. And another one in that vein is Ponti by Sharlene Teo. I think that's another debut novel, and it's set in Singapore, and it's following the paths of two women who are friends, and then it goes 17 years later when one of them is doing a remake of a cult film which her friend's mother had been a movie star back in the 1970s. The cover looks beautiful, and I love the idea of the Singapore setting and the female characters. So I'm there for it. I'm ready to read it, and I'm hoping that will be on the long list. So another one in that category, which Anna mentioned on Eric's The Lonesome Reader video, was The Illumination of Ursula Flight by Anna Marie Crowhurst. And this just sounds like a fun read, apart from anything else. So, and again, it was on my radar last year, and for whatever reason, I missed it. So I'm hoping I'll have a chance to pick that one up. Another one there are 4 more that fall into this category. One is A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza. And I heard about this because Sarah Jessica Parker chose it, I think, for her imprint for publication. So it had a lot of publicity, and then I just haven't seen it in the bookshops. And I've been to inquire in the last week here in Adelaide, and they said it's actually being reprinted. I think it's going into paperback, so they're in between copies at the moment. But I'm very keen to read that. And Spring by Ali Smith, which is the 3rd in the seasonal quartet, and I've absolutely loved autumn and winter, so I hope that's on the long list, but I'll read that anyway. Gingerbread by Helen Oyeyemi. So a few people have recommended this to me, and I haven't read Helen Oyeyemi before, but again, she's an author who I've been keen to try. So this will be another prompt, but I was thinking of reading Gingerbread, so I hope it will be on the long list as well. And The Paragon Hotel by Lindsay Faye, which I think is like a romance, but apparently is really fun, and I love books that are set in hotels. So going by the title alone, I'm thinking perhaps if it's set in a hotel, that's a bonus. That's another one I'm keen to read, which sounds like a lighter read, but apparently is very good. And then a couple that I think will be on the long list, but I don't know that I will read them. One is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh, and that it sounds really intriguing about a woman who stops doing anything for a year and just has a lie down and just sleeps a lot. But obviously more than that must happen in the book, but it sounds very interesting, but it just hasn't appealed to me to pick it up. So I don't know, maybe I should go outside my comfort zone and read it anyway. Another one is Where Reasons End by Yi-Yun Lee, and Amanda and I read her memoir last year, Dear Friend, From My Life I Write to You in Your Life, which was beautiful and very moving, and also wasn't just a memoir, but also talks a lot about some authors who she loves, including Stefan Zweig, who I love as well. So it was so intelligent and meditative and gentle, really insightful, and thought-provoking, but quite dark as well. So she's came across in that memoir as quite a fragile soul. And this book, which is a novel, is about a mother whose son has committed suicide. And I just don't feel like I can rush to that. However, I hope that it will be long-listed because I think she's a beautiful writer. I'm just a bit too apprehensive about reading that immediately. So I think that's all on my list. I think that's 20. So I think they are my 20 long list predictions. So I don't know. I'll be so fascinated to see if I get any right. I'm sure a couple of them are shoo-ins, but there are lots of other ones on there. So let me know if you have any predictions, or if you've read any of the ones that I haven't read yet and you recommend them. Please let me know because I'll read them anyway. They don't have to be long listed. And I hope you're all doing well, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.